Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is the 14th of September 2022, and these are the topics that we will be trying to discuss in detail during the course of the show. We will begin with the latest as far as the climate situation in Pakistan is concerned, with reference to the floods that have caused devastation across the country. In these catastrophic floods and their reactions across the country, Pakistan is striving to help those who are in need, whether it be through the different governments, the federal and the provincial, or whether it be through the armed forces or through the NGOs. Or everybody is trying to do their utmost to help those in need. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab was also in Sohbatpur in Balochistan, where he met with the people. He also gave certain instructions, whether it be the non-payment of the bills for electricity for the months of August, September, or whether it be for provision of clean drinking water and the medical camps for those who are in need in the areas. The government is trying to help the people in need as much as possible. At the same time, the different friendly countries across the world are also helping Pakistan, and by bringing in aid. The international organizations are also helping in, pitching in, and a lot of other countries are also pouring in aid in the form of money for Pakistan to help those who are in need. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story of the day, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan has called on the United Nations Human Rights Council to counsel India to put an end to the human rights abuses that are going on in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Not the first time that Pakistan has talked about it. Nevertheless, Pakistan always has been trying to highlight the atrocities, the barbarities that have been perpetrated on the hapless people in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir by the Indian forces as well as the Indian government, and this is going to be highlighted in our second story. Our third story of the day, ladies and gentlemen, concerns 3 Pakistani soldiers who've embraced martyrdom on Tuesday, when the army and the ISPR says that terrorists from across Afghanistan opened fire. This is the latest incident, and of course the implications are going to the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and it is also complicating the relationship between Afghanistan and Islamabad. This is of course a security threat to Pakistan, and this is not the first time that such threats have emanated from Afghanistan, from within Afghanistan and into Pakistan. And finally, we will be talking about 2 districts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa that have been rocked by blasts, that is in Swat and Kohat. In Swat there have been 8 who have been killed. In Kohat also there have been many who have been injured as well. All of these are also being linked to the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and a lot of fear is emanating within the people of Swat as far as the movement of the TTP within the region is concerned. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns floods, the after effects, climate change, the effect on Pakistan, and the relief and rehabilitation efforts that Pakistan is undergoing to help those in need. More in the following report.
Deadly flooding in Pakistan has destroyed homes and decimated crops in an unprecedented climate disaster, affecting an estimated 33 million people, or about 15% of the population. Satellite data from the European Space Agency mapped the extent of the deluge and revealed that about 1/3 of the country is still submerged, indicating a series of extreme weather events. An intense heat wave in Pakistan that lasted from March to May caused heat-related deaths, damaged wheat crops, and increased glacial melt in the Himalayas. Although majority of the flooding in Pakistan was due to rainfall, glacial melt has added to the effects of more aggressive monsoons by releasing snow and ice melt into Pakistan's river basins. Terming the flood devastation triggered by unprecedented monsoon rains and melting glaciers as climate carnage, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has made an impassioned appeal for substantial debt relief for developing nations. The catastrophic flooding underscores the growing urgency of resolving international debate over who pays for the disastrous effects of climate change. Temperatures have risen at least 1.1 degrees centigrade since pre-industrial times, mainly driven by economic growth in developed nations. At Glasgow's COP26 summit last year, developed economies rejected a proposal by less wealthy countries to create a new loss and damage funding facility.
Professor Zamir Awan joins us in the studios. He's a renowned analyst. Professor Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Professor Saab, I'd like to begin with a lot of questions that are being asked by the general public. Was the extent of rains due to the climate change in Pakistan expected to some extent?
No, of course no. In fact, it was suddenly there was some leads that it is going to be severe, but the intensity of severity was not expected so high. You know, some of the drought hit areas of Pakistan was getting 50 millimeters of rain in a year, and this time they got up to 1,700 millimeters, which we have not imagined. It was beyond our expectations. Definitely there were some early warnings, and especially the hot summer in Europe has demonstrated that it is going to be a very hot summer, and that means the melt of glacier will be more, they will expected more rain, but we have expected that maybe from 50 millimeter, maybe it is more 60 millimeter, 70 millimeter, 100 millimeter, but we have not expected 1,700 millimeter of the rainfall.
Professor Sahab, is there any mechanism to ascertain how much rain is going to happen in Pakistan, for example, next year, for next summers? Do you feel we can anticipate through some kind of mechanism to formulate the amount of rain that we might get in different areas?
In fact, these are the natural disasters. There is no scientific way to measure precisely. But of course, based on our previous experience on some of the indicators, we can estimate that it is going to be a little bit tough time. But to precisely measure how much the intensity, how much the magnitude of this flood or the rain or disaster, it is very difficult. There is no scientific tool at that.
Professor Saab, around 1/3 of Pakistan is submerged underwater. Thousands and thousands, in fact tens of thousands of livestock have been destroyed, even more than that. People have lost their lives. 33 million, more than 33 million people have been affected by it. Children have been affected, women have been affected, and all the diseases that are creeping within the society, especially those who've been affected by the floods. Is there any short-term relief for the people who've been affected by these floods?
I think Pakistan government is doing its best. Political government and the military leadership both are on the front line of the flood hit areas. Today the Prime Minister of Pakistan was in the Balochistan province and they were giving instruction instantly on the site. Army chief has visited many parts of Pakistan which was worst hit by the flood. But of course there is limitation. We keep on criticizing the government for doing little or doing less, because, including myself, because we wanted to build pressure on the government to do more. But actually we should be rational. Government has the capacities, resources are the limited. Who is the government? The government is people like you and me. We have limited capacity. We cannot predict future. We cannot do everything. We are not like Salmani Topi Chhadi. Of course, limitations are there.
Professor Saab, in this limited capacity that the government has, and of course we also are encountered with economic issues that the government is dealing with aptly as well. How important is the help, A, by the civil society, B, by the private sector, and C, by the friendly countries?
Let me start with the civil society. Pakistan is a nation of philanthropists. We pay zakat, which is compulsory. But I know many people who pay much more than the zakat. And we believe in our religion that sadaqah, donation, is a relief to some of your big disasters. So people are very generous. I have seen many individuals, many NGOs donating voluntarily huge amount. Even that themselves they are poor, but still if they have 2 pieces of bread, they 1 piece they are willing to donate. I mean, the public reaction is very positive.
All right.
And people are very careful about the flood affected people.
Private sector?
Private sector, of course, I have seen some of the organizations, they are donating, but I think that is I don't criticize them, but that is more media show, giving the picture and having the photo session and these things. But of course the private sector is also doing.
All right.
Yes.
And what about the friendly countries, the number of aircrafts that are coming with aid, also in organizations like the World Health Organization, the FAO, the World Food Program, UNICEF that are helping those who are in need. Then Google, who has also started to ask for donations from all its users for Pakistan. Do you feel this is going to help our country come out of this crisis?
Let me emphasize, the climate change is an international phenomena. Environment has no borders. Environment do not need passport and the visa to enter to any area of a country. Environment is something common to the humankind. So of course this disaster belongs to the climate change. So it is the responsibility of the whole humankind, all nations, to help Pakistan. But wherever, it is not only the Pakistan, if the disaster happened to any other part of the world, in any other country, in any other nation, the whole humankind should extend the helping hand. This time it is the Pakistan, maybe next time some other countries, some other part of the world. Keeping this in mind, many countries, friendly countries, are helping Pakistan generously. That includes almost all the friendly countries and the rich countries.
China, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, the Turkey, so many countries are helping Pakistan.
I will specifically say about the China. China is the only country who has surpassed the all other countries in helping Pakistan. There was an official donation, relief goods and food items and cash and everything. In addition to that, which is not documented, many Chinese companies are doing a lot of social welfare work during this flood season.
You talked about social welfare work, Professor Saab. At the same time, on the one hand, we need as much of relief goods, as much of tents, as much of clothes and water and food for those who've been affected. On the other hand, for the rehabilitation and the reconstruction efforts also, we'll be needing a lot of help from the friendly countries, those who understand how to construct in areas that are susceptible to floods, that are susceptible to climate change.
Let me complete that the Chinese side.
All right.
Chinese state-owned enterprises in Pakistan are donating liberally. Even that some of the individual Chinese businessmen, they have small business, but they are also donating. If we compile all the Chinese assistance, the government and the private sector and the individuals' assistance, if compile it together, it is much more than the rest of the world. China is really helping Pakistan in this critical moment. We are very much grateful to Chinese. The other thing that you asked about, the other question you asked, you know, rehabilitation, this is emergency. At the current scenario, we are more busy on rescuing the human lives.
True.
The people who are dead, there is no place to bury them. We are more busy with that one. The people who are injured, there is no hospital or medical care. We are worried to how to help them. There are people who are homeless and all around them is the water. We have to provide them the shelters. There are people who have no food. They are starving. We have to access them and provide them the food. These are the emergency measures and we are more busy with these things. Rehabilitation segment will come later on when the water is dried off, and then we now currently there are some of the areas are not accessible. There is no road link. All the roads are damaged only by helicopters or by air, which is very limited access. So I mean the rehabilitation segment will start after the season is over, when the water is dried. Then
because they also say that the rains are going to continue not just till September but also till beginning or mid of October. At the same time, if you look at the statistics, Professor Saab, around 21 million acres of crops are underwater. 65% of the country's food basket crops like wheat and rice have been destroyed. 733,000 livestock has been destroyed, killed. I mean, the amount of damage done to Pakistan and the people is unprecedented.
That's
when will we exactly know the damage that Pakistan has seen or has gone through because of these floods? Because there are a lot of areas where there is still water, although the rains are receding, decreasing, the water is also receding from areas in Sindh. Nevertheless, do you feel that we will ascertain as to how much damage has actually happened in Pakistan?
Initially, I think the Minister of Planning Commission, Professor Dr. S. Iqbal, has estimated more than 10 billion. Then the Secretary General of UN has claimed that it is around, after his visit, it was 30 billion. Today I was watching some of the news that it is about 40 billion. But I don't think that these are the precise figures. The precise figures, because we are over busy to rescue the human lives, to face the instant help. The actual estimate, it might take couple of months after the rainwater has gone out. Then we will estimate. To me, it will be around 100 billion.
All right.
It will be not less than that one.
All right. Food insecurity, hunger, disease are also some of the consequences of these floods that we are already seeing and will be seeing in the months and maybe in the years to come as well. Is Pakistan ready to counter all of this?
It is a natural disaster, and the magnitude of this disaster is so huge. Not only Pakistan, no single one country can face this big challenge. It is the collective responsibility of the international community. We also hope and expect the international community will come and rescue and help Pakistan. Secretary General of the United Nations has appealed to the whole world that liberally help Pakistan. I mean, this is not possible for Pakistan to cope.
That is so true. Responsibility of the world is a very important term that you've just used. Pakistan emits less than 1% of carbon. Nevertheless, it's the most vulnerable or one of the most vulnerable countries as far as the effects of climate change is concerned. Professor Saab, does the world realize the responsibility that it has as far as alleviating the effects of climate change is concerned?
In fact, some of the countries, they have highly industrialized, rapidly industrialized, ignoring the environment factor. They were focused on economic gains. That was a selfish approach. I think that G20 are responsible for this climate change up to 80%. They have developed their economy. They are in a very comfortable zone. But of course, the rest of the world is suffering. Pakistan is the worst victim. There is a realization, but of course, nobody is willing to share his responsibility so easily.
Take the blame. Nobody wants to take the blame.
It is the responsibility of the United Nations to fix the responsibility. I will say not help to Pakistan. It is compensation. It is an obligation of the developed nation who are responsible for this climate change. They should come up and they should fulfill their social responsibility.
We talked about the responsibility of the United Nations, Professor Saab. We know that Antonio Guterres was here. He spent 2 days looking at the damage that has happened in Pakistan as a result of these unprecedented floods. Do you feel the mechanism of the United Nations is going to change as a result of what Antonio Guterres has seen firsthand? Do you feel he is going to exert more pressure on the developed nations in order to do right for countries such as Pakistan and also for other countries that are susceptible to climate change?
First of all, I think that it was great that the Secretary General has visited Pakistan. It showed that the importance of Pakistan to the United Nations and his love for Pakistan. And our government has took him to the flood hit areas, and he has seen with his own eyes and witnessed the devastation of the flood. And he was touched, and he said that it was no words to explain this disaster. Of course, he is appealing, but United Nations has no mechanism to implement some things. They can pass the resolution, they can request the other countries, they can make legislation, but United Nations is limited only on the paperwork. They have no mechanism, they have no force to implement. Definitely, the developed world, their conscience has to be alive, and they should think themselves at least.
So the responsibility basically is on these developed nations to take the first step and help Pakistan that really needs as much of their help as possible. Coming back to Pakistan, a lot of questions were also raised as to the mechanism of helping the people in need and all the aid, how that is going to be dispersed. The digital flood dashboard that was announced by the government and has been put online, do you feel it is a very important mechanism or methodology so that people know how transparent the whole procedure to disperse aid is concerned?
You know that when there is something routine matters, we know how to do, we have to move this direction and then go this and then do this. But this is not that the routine matter, it is something extraordinary, it has suddenly happened. So of course not everybody knew what to do and how to do. There must be some lack of communication or mishandling or misappropriation. It is possible and we expect these things. But the thing about the government is that they should make things transparent.
And I think this is a good step in the right direction.
Yes, good step. We should appreciate it. We should appreciate it.
What do you feel are going to be the major steps that Pakistan needs to take in the weeks to come?
Instantly, we have to focus on the rescue operation. And then, of course, we make appeal to the rest of the world, keep coordinating with the United Nations and all the international platforms and raise our voice, our needs, our requirements should be conveyed to them time to time, and our media can play a very positive role. And inside the country, whatever resources we have, very limited resources we have, we should spend and we should do honestly and transparently.
And finally, Professor Saab, do you feel Pakistan should now take the necessary steps to become climate ready for any such effect of climate change, just like we've seen this year, that could happen in the next years as well? Do you feel Pakistan should already be forewarned of anything that could happen in the years to come?
I think Pakistan has a full of talent. Our scientists, our engineers, technologists are working very hard. We need to utilize their expertise and we should give them the task and we should find an appropriate solution.
All right, I think solutions are very important, but at the same time, at this moment, as you said, the most important thing is to help those in need, to provide them with clean water, with the food, with the tents, with clothes, with the necessary medicine as well, so that they can, prevent themselves from the diseases like dengue, like malaria, like cholera that are affecting so many people. All we can say is that Pakistan is helping those in need, and I hope that the Pak country will continue to remain as one and on one page as far as helping those who are in need is concerned. Thank you very much, Professor Zamir Awan Saab, Analyst, to have talked to us about the disastrous floods that have overtaken Pakistan and have caused extensive damage, and the real damage, as you yourself said, will only be ascertained in the weeks to come. Thank you so very much, sir, to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the atrocities that are being perpetrated by the Indian forces, by the Indian government on the hapless people. Now, Pakistan has called on the United Nations Human Rights Council to counsel India to put an end to the human rights abuses in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This was said by Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations Geneva office, Khalid. He was taking part in a debate at the meeting of the Human Rights Council, and he said that the Human Rights Council can no longer remain a silent bystander as far as the atrocities that are happening in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are concerned. More in the following report.
Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is enduring worst human rights violations at the hands of occupation forces as Hindu nationalist BJP government attempts to tighten its grip upon the occupied valley. In their fresh act of state terrorism, Indian troops martyred one more Kashmiri youth in Shopian district. According to Kashmir Media Service, the troops martyred the youth during a cordon and search operation in Hef Shirmal area of the district. The locals took to the streets against the killing, who were retaliated with fire by the troops. In their malicious attempt to discredit and sabotage indigenous freedom movement of Kashmiris, Indian government has decided to set up FM radio stations near the line of control and international border to wage propaganda against Pakistan Pakistan and Kashmir freedom movement. Making mockery of justice, India's Supreme Court dismissed a petition filed by father of a fake encounter Kashmiri victim Amir Magre. All parties Hurriyat Conference leadership has appealed to the United Nations and international human rights organizations to stop India from killing innocent youth in fake encounters under a wicked plan. The ruthless killing of Kashmiris is part of Narendra Modi-led fascist Indian government's systematic genocide campaign in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Dr. Gregory Stanton, president of the Genocide Watch, warned on 5th of February 2021 that Kashmir is on the brink of genocide.
Now, there's a delegation of the APHC from both sides of the border that is there in Geneva as we speak. This is attending the 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And the basic aim of attending this important session is not only to highlight the barbarities that are being perpetrated on the people of illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but also to exert pressure through the United Nations and through the United Nations Human Rights Council on India so that it changes its maneuvering of how it deals with the people. Not only has this become an issue that is moving steadily towards genocide of Muslims in India and in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir region, but it is also moving towards human rights abuse that is going to an extreme situation that has also been an unprecedented situation on cases like these across the world. This is what Pakistan has also been highlighting on different fora, whether it be at the United Nations, whether it be at the SCO, whether it be at SARC or on the other fora. Pakistan has always talked about the rights of the people of illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the right to decide what they want to do with their motherland, the right for referendum, the right to plebiscite, the right to decide their own fate instead of imposing a fate that is being put into action by the Indian forces and the Indian government under the Narendra Modi-led BJP government. Not only that, there is also the increase in human rights abuses on the people, on the women, on the children in the Indian held valley. Not only are the people not being given their due rights, but their voices are also being muted to such an extent that they cannot even say what is exactly happening in the held region. Altaf Hussain Wani Sahab, who's a Kashmiri leader, joins us online from Geneva. He's part of the APHC delegation. In fact, he's heading this APHC delegation that is attending this 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Wani Sahab, thank you very much to have joined us. Wani Sahab, what is the basic atmosphere as far as the UNHRC is concerned? What are the reactions from the people that you have discussed as far as the human rights abuses in the Indian held valley is concerned? And how determined are they to exert pressure on India?
You see, unfortunately, we were expecting the report of the High Commissioner, third report of the High Commissioner on the situation of human rights in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir this session. But unfortunately, High Commissioner Mr. Besley's term expired. Now we had an acting High Commissioner. Now new High Commissioner has not yet taken the office, so the report did not come in. What is the atmosphere here? Our delegation, which consists of 11 persons, they met different people. They are meeting the different special rapporteurs and also the civil society workers, and everybody is concerned about the situation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and everybody is discussing the current report by the Amnesty International, because that report has exposed India's blatant human rights violations, and as part of systematic campaign which India took against the journalists, political leaders, as well as civil society actors and human rights defenders from 5th of August 2019 till this date. So this report is being discussed each and everywhere by each and every actor of the civil society here, and also by the special rapporteurs. Our delegation today took the stage at the High Commissioner's statement, her updates the council. 5 of our delegates made their statements in the council, demanding the council an immediate attention towards the human rights situation of Indian occupied Kashmir, the way the extrajudicial executions are taking place, the way media has been gagged, the way India is changing the political as well as the religious landscape in Indian-occupied Kashmir by making demographic changes, by giving voting rights to the non-state people, the Indians in Indian-occupied Kashmir, making delimitations, and by that way, the very identity of the Kashmir is at an existential threat. That is what our delegation is telling to the international audience. That is what we told to the council today, and also our delegation has had three important meetings till date. One with the OIC permanent representation in Geneva, and also with the special rapporteur on freedom of assembly, and also special rapporteur on right to development. All those people are very much concerned, and they showed their concern, and that concern will be reflected in their statements and reports to come in future.
Two reports were taken out by the United Nations Human Rights Council highlighting the human rights abuses by the Indian forces and the Indian government, but no tangible action was taken. Now that you are there in Geneva, Wani Saab, and you are talking to the rapporteurs, you are talking to the different representatives of the countries that understand the plight of the Kashmiri people, do you feel change will come? Do you feel some kind of pressure will be exerted on India, or do you feel it will be business as usual?
You see, the change will come, definitely, but for that change, we have to work collectively. Kashmiris have to work for all over the world collectively to raise this voice, to reach each and every segment of civil society, international civil society. You see, we know big powers have their own interests, they have their own economic interests, they have their own strategical interests, they are playing by that. But the biggest power in this world is the civil society. If you approach the civil society, if you are able to make civil society, create a civil society awareness about the Kashmir, about the plight of people of Kashmir, about the human rights violations that are taking place in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and the behavior of the Indian society, that will definitely have a changing mood in the international audience and also in the international powers. Till date, we see a concern from people, but we don't see a tangible action. We don't see India is made accountable at any form by the international actors or international forums. So we want India must be made accountable of its human rights violation in occupied Kashmir and must be brought to justice. That India is member of this council. So a country which is violating all international laws, which is violating all international human rights laws, which has induced the laws which are in contravention to the international humanitarian human rights laws, and the country which is not respecting the special rapporteurs of the United Nations Human Rights Council, she's not inviting them to the India, she's not giving them access to the Indian occupied Kashmir, she did not even respect the statements they made in the council about India. India always says them behave like special rapporteurs, not special prosecutors. Unfortunately, the international human rights machinery is so weak that it doesn't have, I have told you time and again, it doesn't have the teeth to bite a monster like India.
All right. Speaking of India, you said it's a member of the council. Is there a representative there? Has he or she spoken about what India has to say as far as these human rights abuses in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned? And secondly, how many countries are participating in this 51st session? How many delegates have you seen?
You see, there are lots of delegates, this whole international civil society here, there's all the countries here, the full UN body representation is here. So it is almost full. Each and every time, lots of meetings are taken at the sidelines of this council. Also, different so resolutions are being prepared, and you see there are lots of conflicts for that purpose. You have lots of people who are here to represent their countries. There are huge delegations from different countries like Iran, which has sanctions against them, so they are trying to lift those sanctions. There is an atmosphere against China. Presently, the Human Rights Commissioner has a report on China. So China has a huge delegation. China's huge civil society is here to counter the international propaganda against China. And likewise, UAE is somewhere under pressures from civil society actors or some countries. So UAE has a huge delegation and a huge civil society group here to counter the propaganda against them. So there's a big business in Geneva on the sidelines of the council and also in the council. As far as the Kashmir is concerned, Kashmir is a subject which is very dear to many of the people, many of the civil societies around the globe and also states. But unfortunately, as we had a meeting with the permanent representative of the OIC, she was very much Ambassador Nasima Baghi. She was very much concerned about the situation, and she said she will report to the council and also to the OIC about this. And Pakistan did spoke on Kashmir, and that India used its right to reply. As always, India has only thing to say. They blame Pakistan for terrorism. They blame Pakistan for different things, and which has no locus standi when they talk about Kashmir. They don't talk about Kashmir that they are doing something in Kashmir. Then they just posture that Kashmir, they are doing in occupied Kashmir, they are doing development and all that. And we have seen most recently the fabricated and the false accusations laid against some of the insane person who has crossed the line of control, how he was killed in custody by the Indians, but Indians have no shame. And we have seen in recent past how another IIOJK national who was in the jail for 18 years and he was also killed extrajudicially, and this has been reported by the special report to the government of India to reply it. But the government of India so far is arrogant. They are not listening to the sane voices of the globe, sane voices at the international level. That is their attitude. But we, the Kashmiris and our diaspora, is time and again talking about all these things, and they will continue to talk.
All right, Wani Sahab, also you talked about extrajudicial killings. This is nothing new as far as Indian attitude, as far as human rights are concerned. That rape, killing of youth as well, then incarceration of all the Kashmiri leaders, the women, the children who are being denied their rights. The true image of what is happening in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is also not coming out because there is a huge censorship as far as that is concerned. Then there are the undue pressure tactics that are being put on the different journalists that try to speak the truth, Rana Ayub for one and so many others, human rights activists that talk about the issue in Kashmir. Do you feel there is some mechanism through which this issue could be also taken to the international judicial councils or organizations?
But we have talked about it in past also. I'm not a law expert on this, but I could see here the international civil society like the International Center for Human Rights, also the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, ICJ, they talked about the detention of journalists and human rights defenders in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Mainly they talked about the incarceration of Khurram Parvez, the way he has been booked under UAPA. So people have raised their voice. There is a campaign, release Khurram Parvez at international level. So that is there. And also there is, you must have most recently the Amnesty report where they say from 5th of August till the 5th of August 2022, nearly 80 journalists or human rights defenders, they were either called to the interrogation centers, they were physically assaulted, they were tortured, and 27 of them are still under detention. And there are lots of big names who write for the big and credible international publications like New York Times, like Al Jazeera and others. So they are also pursuing their cases. So I think India is earning a bad name. That's why we see that India's freedom index has declined. Now India is at 152. That means Indian state is earning a bad name when it comes to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, or that for that purpose, the human rights in Kashmir or that in India.
All right, Wani sahab, also Articles 370 and 35A, there's a lot of talk of maybe reinstating these two articles as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. We've heard Maulana Nabi Azad, we've heard Mehbooba Mufti and others talk about this. Is there a possibility, will that help if these two articles are reinstated in their true letter and spirit as far as the plight of the Kashmiri people is concerned?
You see, these articles were there in place after the 5th of August 2019, but the struggle for the rights of Kashmiris started way back. It started from the day India occupied the Kashmir in 1947, and most recently we can take the example from 1989. So the Kashmiri struggle primarily is for the right to self-determination, but these articles, when the way they were abrogated, that they were taken out this time, Indian state tried to create such an atmosphere by which the Kashmiris, Kashmiri Muslims especially, will face an existential threat in Indian occupied Kashmir, because these articles facilitate the Indian government to change the material, to create material changes on the ground, which are against the 4th Geneva Conventions, which are against the UN resolutions on Kashmir, and which is against the law of occupation. They cannot change the demography, they cannot change, they cannot make material changes. But Indian government, by abrogating these laws and enacting Indian laws in the Indian occupied Kashmir, is thereby making all these changes, and there is no one to stop her. And that's why the people like Mehbooba Mufti and others do demand, because they work in the Indian constitutional demand. It was a big blow for them, for Mehbooba Mufti, for Farooq Abdullah, for Azad, like people, because they were always telling that India is a democracy, but now they have faced the music of Indian democracy when Indian fascist regime took all those so-called autonomy powers from them and then put them behind the bars, and then made all the material changes they wanted to make in occupied Kashmir, like we talked about the demographic changes, the way they did delimitation in Kashmir, the way they have given voting rights to non-state residents, the way the Indian government is now trying to change the religious landscape in Indian occupied Kashmir by constructing more than 50,000 temples throughout the length and breadth of Indian occupied Kashmir, creating new pilgrimages for the Indian Hindus. That is the way Indian society, Indian government is doing currently, and that's why in order to save their political status, Mehbooba Mufti, Farooq Abdullah and Maulana Nabi Azad are talking about the restoration of Article 370 and 35A. But the people of Kashmir do reject the India's 5th August action by dismantling the state of Jammu and Kashmir into 2 union territories and abrogating all these articles which pose a threat to the very identity of the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you very much, Altaf Hussain. Wani Sahab, Kashmiri leader, talking to us from Geneva live, where he's attending the 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and him and his delegation have met many other leaders. And of course, he says that there's a lot of concern as far as the situation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. Let's come to our last 2 stories very quickly. The first concerns at least 3 Pakistani soldiers who've been martyred as there has been fire from Afghanistan into Pakistan. The ISPR says the terrorists from inside Afghanistan opened fire on Pakistani troops in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's Kurram district, and this is of course a huge security threat as far as Pakistan is concerned. This is also something that Pakistan has been highlighting time and again as far as this security threat emanating from within Afghanistan is concerned. The statement also says that Pakistan strongly condemns the use of Afghan soil by terrorists for activities inside Pakistan and against Pakistan. It expects that the Afghan government will now not allow the conduct of such activities in the future. The AFP, on the other hand, reports that the banned Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has claimed responsibility for the attack. This is the first story. The second story that also is related to the TTP is that 8 people have been killed while 7 other injured in Swat and Kohat blasts. Now these are 2 different blasts that have occurred. 2 policemen among 6, in fact 8 killed in Swat. IED explosion, a grenade attack also in Kohat police station that has left 7 people injured. For the Swat attack, the TTP has claimed responsibility. There's also a lot of apprehension within the public as far as the movement of the TTP in that region is concerned. And of course, there are a lot of alarm bells that are ringing in the Swat Valley. Swat has already seen the effect of TTP in the past as well, and now also they are asking the same questions. There have been a lot of official statements as far as Swat and Kohat are also concerned. Let's hope that the security agencies do the needful and thwart all such elements that are trying to create havoc inside of Pakistan, whether it would be from Afghanistan into Pakistan, as has been seen in Kurram or in Swat. Our security forces, our defense agencies, our armed forces have always been there on the front line, and they will continue to be there. Our confidence is always with them. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new story segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Donate as much as you can to the floods. There are different mechanisms to do that, but do help. Allah Hafiz.